Afternoon. Please. Okay, thank you. Good afternoon. It's a real pleasure and an honour for me to be with you and to have met people from your child protection services since I first came here last November. And we've already had the privilege of collaborating together a little. We were pleased to welcome Ms. Olga, Mr. Sergiu, to Sofia for a European conference which World Without Orphans ran in March. We had 29 different nations represented, and they were able to hear the story of the collaboration between the NGOs in Moldova through Moldova Without Orphans and the Department Directorate for Child Protection, and also both on the main stage in the seminar. So that's been a privilege for us, and we are pleased to share best practice from around the world with your department. So it's a real pleasure and an honour for me to be here today, and very impressive to see the collaboration already existing within your service here in Chișinău. So my title may seem rather grand. My role is to coordinate the work of people leading collaborations of anybody involved in child protection at a national level in countries around Europe as part of a global network doing the same thing around the world, serving the most vulnerable children in our societies. I'm going to share some stories with you today. I'm not a child protection specialist or qualified person. I'm not an academic. I'm a practical leader. My qualifications, my experiences in practical and strategic leadership. I am, in a sense, practitioner because I have two adopted daughters, so I have some insight, who are now adults. So I've had 18 years of practitioner experience. But I'm here not to express a theory or to prove anything, but to tell three simple stories which will lead me to three reflections, and then I will leave you with three simple questions which you can take at a personal level or at a professional level. We all know that the most effective way to work for children is to do it together and collaboratively. So I'm stating the obvious on this slide. But human nature seems to be such that we automatically revert to our own way of thinking. We revert to our own teams, our own groups, unless we proactively and consciously work to listen to people with different views and different perspectives in order to work together. And it's especially difficult in this environment, working with vulnerable children. The work pressure is hard, and often social workers, are working in high conflict scenarios. So to put the time and the effort to think differently and to work with people from a different perspective is all the more hard. In one European country, an orphanage director, a foster care agency, the family, and the social worker may agree that an individual child needs to be placed into foster care. But in that country, the judges have not had the same training, and the court processes are not aligned very well to child cases. And so it's known that the judge may persuade the birth family, who have had nothing to do with the child and have displayed no capacity to safely look after the child, that the blood tie must not be broken, and therefore they return their rights and the fostering of the child is prevented, because you get conflict between different parts of the system. So let me move to my first story. An example of cross-sector and cross-professional collaboration, which brought about a change for many children. So in Romania, just next door, in 2016, 57,000 children were in state care. And the law at that stage relating to adoption was creating bureaucratic obstacles to the placement of children in an adoptive family where reintegration was not possible. In this case, it was the affected families who were talking about this with people from NGOs who were working with them. And those NGO leaders then brought this into the sphere of Romania Without Orphans, a network of NGOs, to talk about the problem. And in turn, ARFO, the name for Romania Without Orphans, had developed positive relationships at a national political level. So they were able to connect, in English we say connect the dots, between the experience of families and children to national politicians. And the president of ALFO is an experienced negotiator, both in business and in the political sphere. So they were able to lobby to get law change to take place, whereby the process of supporting families was strengthened and reintegration of children into families was strengthened with mandatory skills training for those parents. But where the ability to leave the child or integrate the child back into their own family failed, there was an emphasis on the speed then of the process of adoption in order to make sure the child got the best care possible. This happened through the interrelationship between the different sectors, different professions, different sectors, NGO and government and so on. And indeed, ALFO won the award in 2020 for the best lobbying campaign in Romania. And now there are 12,000 less children. I'm not saying it's all as a direct result of this, but it's certainly part of the story. 12,000 less children in alternative care in Romania, and the number of adoptions per year rose from 700 in 2016 to 1,600 in 2022. In my next story, in a different part of the world, Paraguay, another NGO working closely with different professions and different sectors brought about change. So Paraguay has got good law in terms of child protection and it has appropriate structures. However, the perceptions between different functions and people in different parts of the system were not clear, and there was mistrust and bad feeling between people in different sections of the system. And the results of this kind of experience was, for example, that a child might take 5 years before a successful placement for them was found. And in that time, of course, in the life of a child, they completely change and they experience a lot more trauma. And by the end of this, actually, a satisfactory outcome for the child is virtually impossible. So, Paraguay Partnering Families, Protects Families, sorry, PPF, were working with these families and began to see the issues that were happening. And because PPF's ethos is with whoever they work with, they will take an attitude of service, they were able to build over years trust and confidence and good relationship with people in all across the system. So they invited a number of people representing different branches of any aspect of official government or non-official organisations to meet and to talk through these issues with the help of an independent, voluntary facilitator who is a UK-based specialist child protection lawyer. They facilitated a process of listening, and gradually they began to identify what were the issues, not with law or not with legal process, but with communication, with integration of services and so on. And they wrote a manual to govern the way in which different organisations related to each other, got to know each other, and it all grew out of informal gatherings. And the principle that they followed throughout this manual was that every decision should place the child at the centre of the room and their needs. So this manual involved the engagement of the children's minister for Paraguay, they involved the judiciary, and so within the last month, this manual has been adopted and signed off by the head of the Supreme Court of Paraguay as being a mandatory document that must be used and followed in all cases regarding children. So it's just been signed in the last month, so there's a lot of work still to be done. But the people involved in the whole process, from the children's minister to the head of the Supreme Court to the different officials and different professions who are involved, are confident that this is going to make a huge difference in the life of many children across Paraguay. Finally, a third example, which is at a global level. So at the beginning of the COVID pandemic, the World Health Organization, UNICEF, the Centers for Disease Control, or CDC, and other US and international bodies recognized that families locked down in their homes during the pandemic would come under tension, and in the most at-risk families it would lead to an increase in violence, particularly against women and against children. And they wanted to find a way to support those families in their own homes. So, with impetus from these global organizations and institutions, others took their place in helping bring this about. So from the academic world, Oxford University in the UK has a centre for lifelong parenting, which has developed research-based but simple and easy to access advice for parents. These were turned into advice sheets that were, again, beautifully designed with very simple tips on that could be distributed to families in lockdown. And they were distributed via the internet and in some countries by the mobile networks. But they needed to distribute them. World Without Orphans has got people in countries around the world. Within 1 month, we'd managed to translate these into 80 different languages and have it published. And within another month, we had it into a further, it was up to 100 languages. And by 6 months after the beginning of the pandemic, the documents had been downloaded and used by 150 million people worldwide. And the figure currently stands at 210 million. And they were distributed through community groups, people like WWO, Maestral, which is a Roman Catholic organisation, non-faith, just general groups who are working in communities, and we've had great feedback about the use of those documents to alleviate the experience of families. Again, major organisations where it happened that members of those teams were voluntary board members of NGOs, and so that relationship connection and enabled the organisations to come together and allowed the kind of big, structured, official groups and smaller, ground-level, widely distributed and networked volunteer sector groups to enable world-class excellence advice to get into the hands of people at the local level. They've now been adapted into wartime tips and are being used for families from Ukraine and in the process of being adapted for wars around the world. I actually saw copies of these in use when I visited the Dorcas Aid Office in Moldova in November, so they're here being used. So, some reflections. Obviously, professionalism is an absolute given, whether you're in a voluntary group, in a professional role, part of a statutory body, in order to be able to work together. But here are 3 things that I think are in common to the stories I've told and many other stories of successful collaboration. First of all, you need to create proactively and deliberately informal and formal opportunities for people to meet each other and get to know each other from across the different sectors. And it's from that kind of fertile soil that innovation and ideas for better collaboration, for better solutions are born. In fact, here we are now, meeting and having such collaborations and such conversations. Your attitude is absolutely key. Listen, 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 and listen for the very best of what you can hear from what other people are saying so that you can invest in that. Not listen to criticize, not listen to assess, but listen to find the best and listen for ways of cooperating. And finally, whereas relationship and informality and listening and attitude are vital, actually so is good structure. If you're going to take ideas and implement them on a wide-scale basis, then you do need the good structure that will facilitate that to happen. But ensuring that the question that's at the middle of all those structures is, how are we putting the best interests of the individual child in the first place in every single decision? So those are my reflections. I don't yet know the detail, although I've learned a little bit more already, of how child protection works in Chișinău or in Moldova. But I do know there is some great practice, and I also know that there are some great collaborations and cooperation between the statutory sector and the NGO sector and others. But please allow me humbly to leave you with these 3, I haven't forwarded the slide, have I? There we are. These 3 questions to reflect on in your own work. What are you doing to listen to the unheard voices in the care of children here? What more can you do to build trust and mutual understanding? And how well do legal, political and social structure, processes and practices serve the child? I've been very broad in my descriptions, be very happy to talk to people afterwards with any more detail, and it's a real pleasure and an honour to be with you this afternoon. Thank you very much.